Hello, I'm Mabel Chan, and this is One in a Billion. Today, the last episode of our 5-part special series, LifeChangers, Time to Tell. In this series, we focus on Asian philanthropists who have built a lifetime of success by challenging themselves to reach higher, do better, and give back even more.
My name is Kyung. In Korean, it's Yoon Kyung-bok, and I am the president and co-founder of the Korean American Community Foundation in New York. One fun fact about me is that I have a black belt in Taekwondo. I actually earned all my pocket money by teaching women self-defense.
Kyung is a multi-talented leader with a lot under her belt. A television journalist in New York, public speaker, philanthropic leader, and former executive producer at the World Bank Institute. Kyung left her homeland after a war that ended without a peace treaty. It was a time of gratitude for Kyung when she first came to America. Kyung says she was not an immigrant when she landed in this country. Why not? What did she see about America then that was new and surprising? And what are some of the key moments in her life and career that have inspired her to give back to the Korean American community?
None of us can solve all of the world's problems, but each of us can make a difference.
In this episode of Life Changers, Kyung tells me about the difference she has made through her philanthropic mission at the Korean American Community Foundation. Here's our conversation. I want to begin the interview by asking, is there a philanthropic or public service background in your childhood?
I was born after the Korean War, and I left Korea when I was 6 years old. My father was with the Korean Foreign Service, which is why we came to America. The worldview we had was a lot of gratitude to be in this country with a dishwasher and flush toilets. I mean, Korea was really, really poor at the time. So I think our mindset was really not about how to give away our money. Now, at the same time, being raised in a Christian household and with a certain set of values, we were always taught values of tithing and offering and just helping others. And I think that was something that was ingrained in me at a very young age.
Wonderful. You mentioned church and being a Christian. Were you in any church leadership roles when you were younger?
We attended a Korean Methodist church in Washington, D.C. There were not many Korean churches at the time. There were no opportunities in terms of leadership.
But Kyung saw an opportunity to learn a critical life skill that benefits not only herself, but also other women, for-profit and not-for-profit.
I have a black belt in Taekwondo. All through college, I actually earned all my pocket money by teaching women self-defense. But I was a terrible businesswoman because I realized early on the women who could least afford to take my self-defense classes were the ones that needed it the most. A lot of my students were older than me. A lot of them were not well off. And so I just didn't charge a lot of people. And one of my students was a professor at Harvard. Those who could afford to pay paid me a lot. So I think that idea of service was very much there.
How would you talk about the formative experiences in your upbringing that shape your philanthropic passion for today?
Even though I didn't grow up in Korea, I was always very aware of the country that I came from. And in my lifetime, I saw the enormous economic development and the betterment of standards of living and life opportunities for people living in Korea. That really made an impression on me that with the right policies, the right support, people can really thrive.
What are you most passionate about achieving through your philanthropic mission?
It really has to do with working with the Korean American community that defines success at when more people are doing well, not just a few elites doing well. One of the keys to South Korea's economic development was universal primary education. it invested in education for girls as well as boys. You can see, the fruits of that because an educated woman is so key to a country's economic development. Understanding the inherent potential and dignity of everyone, whether they're poor or rich, or whether they're educated or whether they're not, but investing in that and also just understanding that no group is better than another.
Mhm.
That has been my passion and why we take a broader view about celebrating success as people work in many, many sectors that can be about lifting each other up.
Right. Yeah. There's not just one way to be successful. There are many different ways. Let me ask you, what makes KACF, Korean American Community Foundation, unique in what you offer the Korean American or Asian communities as a whole?
In 2002, I was invited to a dinner that was actually hosted by the then Korean Consul General. And he was really interested in connecting with who he saw as the most successful Korean Americans in New York City. I was invited because I was the first Korean American press reporter in New York, and a lot of Koreans in New York City knew me for that. And also Juju Chang was there. There were other Korean Americans, managing directors of investment banks or partners at major law firms. The Consul General kind of challenged us in a nice way over dinner. Here you are, some of the most successful Korean Americans in New York. What have you done for your community lately? We all kind of looked at each other because that was not really something that we had thought about. We had also internalized the more successful you are in American society or corporate culture, the more disconnected you might be from the Korean community. Success means getting out of your community and get into the mainstream.
Exactly. That word mainstream versus the marginalized, and Korean and other ethnic minorities are seen as marginalized.
But I think that is where we can continue to feed into that, or we can push back on that, right? That's really was at the crux of why we started KACF, Korean American Community Foundation. There are struggles of many immigrants who don't speak English well, who don't have networks or access to opportunities. And people who really understand those needs are grassroots community organizations, often started in church basements. And we saw so many of those grassroots organizations, they were really addressing in a language, culturally competent way the needs of Korean immigrants. But what they didn't have were connections to funding or to mainstream philanthropy. And so we started KACF to be that bridge in our community, not to provide any direct services ourselves, but we did have our networks, our Rolodexes, and that through our own giving, bring mainstream dollars and to raise awareness about needs in our community. That's what KACF has been able to do. In our first year of raising funds, 2003, through our own giving, asking our friends and family and colleagues, we raised $60,000, and we were very proud of that. And we gave out 5 grants to organizations helping the most vulnerable in our community, about $12,000 grants. At our 20th anniversary gala, we surpassed $4 million.
That's incredible. The $4 million, congratulations. That's a huge progress. How would you describe what drives that jump in giving?
Philanthropy, or the practice of giving, it is a practice, just like working out at a gym is a practice. Over 20 years of that practice and creating a culture and supporting each other and encouraging each other. We started first with a slogan, $1 a day for our neighbors. And it was really this idea that for less than a bottle of water or a cup of coffee, that we could set aside $1 a day to give. By spreading the word and getting 1,000 of us to commit to $1 a day, it would be sustainable. Getting more and more Korean Americans organized around giving together we can actually move the needle on helping our low income and financially insecure neighbors, that we can actually invest together and make a big difference.
That's sensational. What you're describing, the heartbeat of the mission is actually to move everyone who can spare a dollar a day, right? That sounds so doable. Over the years, what impact have you seen that you're most proud of?
We have grown our grants. We saw that our lever of change is really around the strength and effectiveness of the organizations. Many of them started in a church basement or whatever, but we just really wanted to invest in how do you make those organizations stronger, more professional.
As Kyung looked back on the first years of growing pains, she described what had been a huge hurdle for many Asian Americans to overcome.
So many of us are thinking, oh, we got to be a doctor or a lawyer. There's this mindset being working in nonprofit means that you're going to have to take a vow of poverty or something. They think of it as just volunteerism. But to do something that is going to be sustainable over a long term, you need to have professional and experts and staff, and you have to attract and retain the best professionals to grow. And so we've done a lot of investments around how to develop strong fundraising strategies. How do they develop a board? How do they align their programs with their mission? Those are really key pillars to growing nonprofit organizations.
Growing a nonprofit is good, but here comes a personal story that truly brings joy and pride.
I'm really proud of one of our grantee partners called Miral. In Korean means wheat grain. They help Korean American families that have children who are physically handicapped. There was a mother of a boy born with cerebral palsy, and we asked her to speak at one of our KACF galas from the client perspective about what a difference KACF funding had meant for Miral. And she got up, she said when she gave birth to her child and that he was so severely handicapped, she just was so angry at God. Why did this happen to me? Of course, she loves her son. Then there's in Korean culture, there was some other stigma around a handicapped child, that there's superstition that it's something that the parents did wrong. So what it meant for her to find an organization like Miral that had programs for these handicapped children, she was able to connect with parents with children with disabilities, other Korean parents, and that they were able to be a support to each other.
However, that nonprofit group, Miral, had struggled with funding year after year until the Korean American Community Foundation came in and provided the first substantial funding for multiple years that clients like this mother can count on.
And then Mabel at our gala, she said, and that is why I am a $1 a day donor to KACF.
Oh.
And I just remember the dignity of this woman that she has received, but she gives too.
Yes.
And she sees herself as a donor. The most powerful lesson and impact for me that I'm most proud of is that we're building a culture in our immigrant community that there is nobody who's like more than or less than, that we are all privileged to be able to give because we have also received.
And over the past 20 years, KACF, the Korean American Community Foundation, has received and given quite a bit.
We surpassed $10 million in grants, and we have funded about 85 organizations and over 135 projects. The North Star is really investing in nonprofits that are helping to move low-income, vulnerable immigrants to a place of economic security, to a place of self-sustainability.
Economic insecurity is multifaceted. It can be related to food, job, housing insecurity, living with domestic violence, or with someone with mental health problems.
And so we really want to build and strengthen the safety nets. And we see that the nets that are closest to the ground, that are available to capture somebody who might be suddenly in a free fall, are the community organizations. And that's why we believe in strengthening.
One big piece of that strengthening work is about emergency response, crisis response and rescue that KACF does. Here is a scenario: domestic violence against undocumented immigrants. Hear how Kyung describes it.
If you're in a dangerous situation, you need to be rescued. But beyond the rescue, what is it that this mom and her children would need? English as a second language. She might need job skills, she might need affordable housing, insurance, legal services so that she can get a green card, because sometimes abusers hold that status over them.
During the pandemic, KACF created a COVID Impact Fund to accompany or to walk alongside those in need.
Our grantee partners, they are able to walk alongside our community because so many, especially people who don't have language skills, working in service industries like nail salons or dry cleaners or restaurants, those are disproportionately impacted.
Frankly, before this podcast interview, I haven't focused on Asian Americans in New York City as having a sizable segment being considered poor and needy until Kyung gave me the data. It caught me by surprise that you said Asian Americans are the poorest ethnic minority group in New York. 1 in 4 Asian adults lives in poverty in New York City.
That often takes people by surprise because there is this stereotype of Asian Americans being very, very successful, and high net worth Asian Americans. Obviously that there are some examples, but it paints a very limited part of a community that really erases the fuller picture of who Asian Americans are.
According to Robin Hood, a poverty-fighting organization in New York, 23% of Asians live in poverty. Its Poverty Tracker annual report found that 47% of Asian New Yorkers faced financial hardship or health disadvantages in 2020. That report, which is a collaboration with Columbia University, covers over 550 Asian survey responders who came from more than 30 countries in Asia. Most of them took the survey in Mandarin or traditional Chinese characters. The most vulnerable are those with little English proficiency, with a high school degree or less, and aged 65 or older.
Actually, Korean senior citizens, so over the age of 65, they have one of the highest limited proficiency of any group in this country. We need more programs to help support this population. It's been the role for KACF. If you're talking about like a 75-year-old Korean grandma who is absolutely invisible to mainstream funders or philanthropy because she is just totally in the margins of American society. She has no voice. She is invisible. We really wanted to mobilize support for these very invisible, voiceless, marginalized communities.
Kyung, I wonder if you could give a shout out to a few grassroots organizations that you have supported that address these issues you're describing.
One very important organization in our community in Queens is the Korean Community Services that provides hot meals and programs for Korean American senior citizens, Korean Community Center where people can come. And I think the fellowship is really important. You know, we need to have meals, but it's really about a place of belonging. The Womankind, which is the New York Asian Women's Center, it's now 40 years they've been in the front lines of helping women of various Asian ethnicities have access to safety and affordable housing.
Besides these emergency food, shelter, and safety services, Kyung says philanthropy should involve a 3-part approach: Education, number one, teaching people basic communication, work, and life skills. Building self-sufficiency, number two. And last but not least, investigating and correcting systemic flaws or failures that contribute to the root causes of inequality. Kyung, with your journalism background, I just wonder whether at KACF there is that piece of gathering the stories and the data and present to state legislators or even the Fed level to get more help.
Yeah, so we fund research and we partner with organizations that have the expertise and the resources to be doing research and providing data. We are very invested in that as well.
Years before leading the Korean American Community Foundation, Kyung was a board member and a volunteer for another organization where she'd learned something profoundly life-changing. It involved a project about building a women's shelter in a quiet neighborhood. In 2019, you talked about a women's shelter for victims of domestic violence that came under a storm of public outcry, including some ugly racial slurs and threats. That did not intimidate you or your staff. Quite opposite, you actually were inspired. Tell me more about that.
When the neighbors got wind of our shelter being in the works, it was very, very flagrant case of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. There were people who were actually saying, oh, it's probably a front for a brothel. It was just outrageous. They started putting up flyers in the neighborhood saying, stop the shelter, and they put our address. They sued us. We had to sue to be able to open. I mean, we were absolutely legal.
Once they got the permission to start operating the shelter, Kyung, who was the chair of the board at the time, decided to link arms with other board members and staff to go spend the night at the shelter. Why?
We just didn't know what the neighbors were going to do. And we didn't want to put women who are in vulnerable positions already into something where they might get yelled at, or we just didn't know. So I took my son, who was very young at the time. That's also taught me so much. For me, it was a gift to be able to walk in those footsteps of what it meant for a woman, and with her son coming to the shelter, it really gave me an appreciation of the kindness and the welcome of our staff, their professionalism, just sleeping in that bunk bed that night. And I thought about all the women who would be coming after me, and it just gave me renewed affirmation and encouragement and determination to keep doing this work.
That's amazing. What were you hoping to achieve by spending the night there in terms of appeasing the crowd or changing their minds? And were you able to succeed?
Over time, the neighbors saw that we were very quiet. We could be good neighbors. They were scared that our shelter somehow was going to bring violent people to the neighborhood.
How is the shelter doing today?
It's doing great. And we have many other shelters around the city. So that is a good example of like how we can help more of the women who need it the most. It was through that experience that years later helped me to think about starting our community foundation as a community funder. And that has been something that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't been a volunteer.
Because of time, I actually do want to jump to maybe one last question. How do you think about how much one can afford to give? What advice would you give young people, let's say in their 20s and 30s, in looking at what they can afford to give to serve that higher purpose?
What I would say is to connect with something that you care about. None of us can solve all of the world's problems, but each of us can make a difference. For KACF, what we've learned is that the practice of giving, if you are getting into a habit of giving just a little bit, doesn't even have to be $1 a day, right? $1 a day is $365, and that can be pocket change to one person, but that could be very significant to another person. I don't know about you, but I really think that we are really kind of trained in how to get into the best university, how to get that next job. We should absolutely, nothing wrong with striving to get to the next place. But if we can think early on and build in the practice of giving, then it's really like Winston Churchill said, that the measure of one's life is not by just what you get, it's by what you give.
So before we ring in the new year, why not think about what you can give? What do you care about? It may be the Korean American Community Foundation. It may be us, 1 in a Billion Productions. We, as a public charity, have been bringing you our podcasts for 6 seasons now. We welcome your donation. Just go to our website at www.oneinaBillionVoices.org. 1 in a Billion is supported by our corporate sponsor, Claudia Lin, founder of Legacy Maker, LLC. The social mission of Legacy Maker, LLC is to shine a light on stories of private businesses and entrepreneurs who have created lasting legacies through their philanthropic endeavors. Claudia Lin's consulting practice specializes in optimal risk transfer through insurance, enterprise risk management, and ESG transformation. 1 in a Billion is produced by our sound engineer and designer, Brian Latinowich, and our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy. Let us know if you want to join our team of volunteers, help us plan events, or pitch a story. Just go to our website, oneinaBillionVoices.org, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.